Welcome to All Out in the Open. I'm Ben Shalati, and today I'm joined by my good friend Mike Poret. Mike is the man behind the camera who has done behind-the-scenes work for the podcast for the last 5 years. He's a good friend, an important person, and he has saved our butts and made the podcast possible, and I can't wait for you to get to know him better. Mike, so happy to have you on the podcast today.
I know, this is exciting.
Is it for you?
I mean, it's not my first time on the podcast, but it's my first time doing like an actual episode where I like talk about things that aren't silly.
Yes, because you've been on some like season recap episodes.
Yeah, season recaps. I did like a Thanksgiving episode with you guys where we did hot takes on Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes.
It was thrilling content, that one.
Indeed, it was very fun. But Mike, tell the listener just a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Well, I'm Mike.
We call you Sound Guy Mike.
Yes, that is my official title. I am Sound Guy Mike. Basically, I'm just a tech nerd who is enthusiastic about helping in the LGBTQ space. I really like cars. I like tech. I like exploring the outdoors. I just made myself sound like the most generic white boy in the world, but I guess there I am.
I actually need you to come over to my house and fix my TV at some point. So,
okay, perfect.
I have 2 remotes. I'm sure there's a way to just get one.
That is my specialty right there. Okay, we'll get you the one remote life. You'll feel ritzy.
Perfect. That'd be amazing. Anyway, Mike, I want to talk about how you got involved in the podcast, but first I just want to talk about your story, your origin story. So just tell us a little bit about when you came to understand your orientation, what that coming out process was like. Just give us a little background.
Well, it's really interesting telling my story because it almost feels like nothing new or special because there are so many common elements. And obviously we'll get to this later, but helping out with the podcast for as long as I have and hearing as many stories as I have, it's interesting how there's just so many common elements. Like we all kind of go through the same things with just slight variations. In my case, when I was in high school, I definitely sensed that I had an attraction to men, but I didn't really think too much of it at that point for where I was in my life at that point. I just wasn't too concerned about dating. I didn't really feel like that was attached to how I actually would be in a relationship. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I came home from my mission, and I was, just kind of wrestling with the fact that I actually was attracted to men, that that's when it kind of clicked for me. I actually had a friend. This is a huge blessing for me. When I was at BYU, one of my roommates, Javier, seriously one of my best friends, and he's a great friend to have because he's the kind of person that he just will talk with you about anything, and he has no embarrassment about talking about any topic, which is honestly really good for me.
Love that for him, and for you.
But one of those things was he took a class called Healthy Sexuality in Marriage, I think was the title of it. And it was in the School of Family Life.
This is at BYU.
This is at BYU. And he was telling me how good the textbook was and I should read it. And I was like, are you crazy? You want me to purposely read a textbook for fun? Uh-huh. And this is someone who just doesn't read a lot in general anyway. But I remember, he was saying that, and eventually I was like, sure, why not? I'll go ahead and read it. And it was actually, much to my chagrin, it was actually pretty educational and good for me to read. And, mm-hmm. As part of this book, they were kind of exploring how, typically in our culture, sexuality is just not discussed a lot. And so I feel like the class was kind of geared towards our culture specifically, mm-hmm. to kind of catch people up on things that they hadn't talked about before. And previously had been taboo topics.
Yeah.
But the authors of this book, one of the things that they discovered is there were a lot of couples who had questions and like were embarrassed to ask questions and things like that. And so when they would do firesides with newlywed couples, they would give them an opportunity to write their questions on a piece of paper and just send it to the front anonymously. And then they would answer some of the questions. And at the end of the book, they had sort of like an FAQ of like some of the most common questions that came up in those firesides in those meetings. And one of the questions was, what if I'm not attracted to my spouse?
Oh.
And
I can see why that'd be a hard question to ask your spouse.
Yes, be very, very difficult. And so, I remember kind of reflecting on that one. I was like, ooh, that kind of hit home for me because like at that point I had tried to date a few different women, a few different girls, and bless their hearts, they were very patient with me. Because at that point I was still thinking like, oh no, I'm not gay. That's not a thing. Mm-hmm. But the answer to that question, basically they went through, some of the other stuff that they talked about earlier in the book with like emotional connection and spiritual connection and how those can play into physical connection because, they're all sort of interrelated. And, I eventually, kind of got to the bottom of it where it said, or it could just be like, you're not attracted to that person and that's okay. That's just something that is. Mm-hmm. And it finally clicked for me at that point, like, oh, this isn't something that I just like change. And, that's something that came a little bit later for me than a lot of other people. A lot of people have that realization, when they're teenagers. I was, early 20s when I figured that out. But that's when it kind of clicked for me. I'm like, oh, that's just an inherent thing. This isn't something that like was caused or that can be changed.
And it sounds like that was a relief to you.
It was mixed. It was a mixed bag at that point. Now looking back, yes, absolutely a relief because there's like it kind of takes some of the pressure off. At that point, then there are a whole bunch of other implications. Again, these are all very common things that have been talked about so many times on the podcast, but, it's just the is this okay? Like, is this a sin? Like, this is inherent, and then you wrestle with all of those questions. But coming through on the other side of that, and there are, many other guests who have talked about those particular struggles probably far more eloquently than I could.
No one could be more eloquent than you, Mike.
Only when I'm not trying. It's something that I would consider to be one of the biggest blessings in my life at this point. But anyway, there's my story in a nutshell. Yeah. The Reader's Digest version.
Well, talk to us about like coming out to your family and close friends. Like, what was that like for you?
Uneventful. I would say that like for my family in particular, just the dynamics of my family, I was never particularly concerned about like, being disowned or thrown out or anything like that. That said, it definitely was a difficult transition period. Both of my parents, are a little bit older and, very conservative upbringing. And so it was a huge learning curve for them. I mean, honestly, just as it was for me. But they were always very patient and kind. And, it took a lot of time to get used to the idea, just like it took me a long time. It took me from high school to early 20s to kind of like settle into the idea. My siblings were a fair bit quicker than that, but me and my parents took a minute. But yeah, I would say uneventful in the best ways.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I've met your mother and she's absolutely delightful.
Oh, I think that she is an absolute gem. She's a wonderful human.
She sure is. Wonderful. All right, well, Mike, talk to us about how you got involved in the podcast. You are this guy who had been at BYU. You come to terms with your orientation. How did you even like find out about the podcast and want to get involved?
So that was kind of a funny story, actually. This was like at the very tail end of my BYU experience. I was actually seeing a therapist who also went to BYU, part of the therapy program. And, as part of the stuff that we were talking through, he recommended I listen to Questions from the Closet, which I had never heard of before. Mm-hmm. And I had heard your name before and I'd heard Charlie's name before, but I had never heard of the podcast before. And this was when you were probably like I don't know, maybe like 10 or 15 episodes into the first season would be my guess. And so I listened to a few of the episodes, and like it was genuinely very helpful for me. And like I just had this like little, oh hey, I wonder if they want help with this. Because at that point you were pretty much just like doing it yourselves, just the two of you in the basement, right?
Yeah. And what you might not know, Mike, is so our first few episodes were recorded at BOU Broadcasting, and they like had an audio engineer that was going to help. Then the pandemic happened, so there was a shutdown, and I lost track of the person or never has. I don't know, but then it was just like me and Charlie doing it, and we didn't have equipment, and so we went up to Richard Oster's house to record, and he lives like 45 minutes away from where I live, and so and Charlie and I were both living in Provo, and so we'd like coordinate guests and like using Richard Oster's house, and it was like such a hassle to drive so far, and so finally I just bought audio equipment and just put it in my basement, but we didn't know how it worked or how to use it, and then Charlie did all the editing, and he was struggling. He's like, Ben, I can't do this. I was like, fine, I will find someone, and I will and I was like trying to figure out how to get it like an editor, and I was like praying about that at this time. Like I was like, God, we're in over our heads. Help us.
So basically that little inkling I felt was an answer to prayers, what you're saying.
Indeed.
Incredible.
Yeah. Because Charlie was so busy because he had just started graduate school. And he was doing all the editing. So he was like, I can't edit this episode. Can you edit it? I was like, sure. And I didn't know how to edit. And it took me like forever, and it was awful.
It's time consuming. Like at this point, like we've got a system down that makes it a lot easier, but in those early days, like it was a time consuming process.
So you got this inkling.
Yeah, so I had bits and pieces of that backstory, but not the whole thing, so I appreciated that. But I was already following Charlie on Instagram, and so I just like sent a message to Charlie, and I was like, hey, do you guys want help? Like, this is what I do professionally. Like, I don't work in podcast specifically, but I work in broadcast. And at that point, that's where Ben comes in. So this is kind of a fun one, audience. So you messaged me on Charlie's account and were like, hey, I'm really bad at getting back to people. You should message Ben about this. Which is really funny.
Yeah. Because Charlie, his book had just come out like, I don't know, just a couple months before. And he was getting dozens of messages a day. And this was like the first time Charlie had like gotten a little more prominent. And he's like, I can't do this. This is overwhelming. I was like, let me help. Because like my job was so slow. So I would respond. I only did this for a couple of weeks, but I'd respond to all of his DMs for.
So everything just kind of like lined up perfectly for us to just like fall into each other's lives, I guess.
Yeah. So when I saw your message, I was like, oh my gosh, we need help. But don't message Charlie because just message me. So I pretended to I told you to message me, but it was me telling you to message me.
Which is incredible. And I didn't find out about that until like months later, I don't think. But yeah, no, it's one of those things where everything just kind of like lined up and fell into place, and you're like, I think that was too much for coincidence. You know, there's no way that was just an accident.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't know who you were. So I was like, come over to the house. Like, let's meet and talk. And then as we chatted, I was like, oh, this guy knows his stuff and we know nothing.
Well, I appreciated it too, because as a good meet greet, and like we all were like, oh, okay, this is not like a weird person. We're all genuine, real good people. But yeah, and then from then on, I've been a part of it, and it's just been kind of a thing.
Yeah. And we are so grateful. I mean, I think you do more work for the podcast than anybody. I think you've put in more time than anybody.
I mean, I don't want to discount. There's a lot of people putting in a lot of time, especially at this point. It's grown, you know, and we have so many people that are helping with like, you know, answering emails and social media posts and website upkeep and all of that stuff. So it's definitely taken an army, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, one thing I hadn't anticipated. So my thought was we would record the episodes and we would just like send them to you and you would edit them and then just publish them. But one of the things you said was it would be helpful if I'm there when you record. And so I hadn't anticipated that. And so suddenly you were there when we were recording episodes. And I just and that was a lot of fun, like having an extra person there listening.
Yeah, and you know, there have definitely been my fair share of times when I've been, you know, behind the camera just like wiping tears away or just like more often, Ben, I hate to break it to you, audience, but the dad joke humor that Ben often delivers, that is right up my alley. So quite often, I'm like busting a gut behind the camera, trying to do so silently.
Yeah. Yes.
But no, it's always a good time. It's a fun experience to kind of get the windows to see the interaction live as it's being recorded between the guests and everything.
And sometimes, and this all gets edited out, but we'll be like, hey, Mike, does this make sense? Or like, is this landing? And you'll give us your honest opinion. And you've never been wrong.
Yes, I've never been wrong.
No,
we'll go with that.
Now when it comes to this, at least. So I mean, maybe since like episode 20 or so. I don't know exactly when you came
I'd
in.
have to go back and look. I don't remember exactly which one it was even. But I have to remind myself.
But it was about then. Like we'd only been going a few months. You've listened to a lot of episodes.
A lot of
interviews. What has it been like for you to hear all these stories like firsthand? And then hear them again as you're doing the editing. Like you hear these stories a lot.
Yeah, I hear them twice. It's a blessing. It's been a blessing, honestly. Because I don't have a lot of exposure to the LGBTQ community at large. Obviously, like I have my group of friends that are here. But it's been incredible to get the exposure to the broader community. Because I think with you and Charlie, with your circle of influence, just between, your blogging days and the books and the podcasts, doing firesides, you really get out there and you meet a lot of people. And I kind of get to benefit from that, from hearing all these stories that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to hear. And it's been eye-opening. It's been eye-opening for sure.
Yeah. What have been some episodes or some guests that have stood out to you?
A lot of them. I actually took some notes. I went through earlier today and found some of the episodes that kind of were memorable ones to me. So just kind of like, and by no means are like these the only good episodes. These are just the ones that were meaningful to me. And I think part of that too is it feels like I have been growing as a person along with the podcast. It feels like the podcast has kind of grown up. The kinds of things that we've talked about have kind of like progressed and grown up a little bit. And I feel like the same can be said for all of us that have been involved. Like we've all had kind of a growing up process. So like one of the early ones, it was so meaningful to me just where I was at that point in my life was the stages of coming out with Scott Christopherson. That was really interesting because I really like kind of like the scientific, let's break it down and like see that. And that was such a helpful tool for me to realize like how coming out looks, different phases of it, why it looks different for me than it looks for someone else and how it progresses. And just like having that tool, that was kind of one of the ones I was like, oh, that's actually very meaningful. And I've honestly referred to that little piece of information so many times since then. Like it's been incredibly helpful, just me with my friends and even like, stuff that isn't necessarily directly related to the LGBTQ community. It's very universal principles, I feel like. Yeah,
for sure. Some background on the episode. So back then, we would often like have a friend or someone we would want to have as a guest, and then I would just like reach out and be like, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? And they'd be like, great. I'm like, okay, let's pick a topic. So it's often the person before the guest. And so we invited Scott to be on because he's
great.
You
mean the person before the topic?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the person before the topic. Because the person, the guest is the same thing.
Yes.
So we invited Scott to be on, and we were trying to figure out like what to talk about. And then when he came over, we still hadn't landed on it. And I was like, well, I just gave this presentation. Let's just talk about the presentation. And so that's what we ended up doing. So it was all really off the cuff. Like it wasn't planned. It was just, well, my part, like the information was planned, but like right. Scott's reactions and Charlie's reactions were all really authentic. And
honestly, and I feel like those are the best moments in the podcast are the ones that have been unplanned, the authentic ones, the off the cuff stuff. Like even when we did the first live event, that was not a planned thing. That was literally just like us chatting one night, just like, hey, this would be a good idea. And I feel like so many episodes were just, the off the cuff, and not to say that nothing was planned, but like the best parts were the ones that we didn't know were coming.
Yeah.
I feel like.
For sure. Okay. What other episodes?
Okay. Let's see here. So just a fun one for me personally, actually, was what does it mean to be non-binary with Bobby Lee?
Oh yeah.
Because I actually worked with Bobby at BYU. We were in the same department at the library working like tech, cameras, microphones. So shocking, I know. But they were hilarious and just such a fun person to be around. And so it was kind of interesting because like that episode, when we recorded it was like a little bit of a reunion for me because I hadn't seen them for a couple of years at that point.
Yeah.
So just on a personal note, that was kind of fun. And it's also kind of nice to realize like, oh, it's not like I'm the only one that had a coming out experience in my circles. Like there's a whole bunch of people that I was with along the way and we just didn't know at that point.
Yeah. And if I recall, Bobby didn't know you were going to be there and didn't know that you were gay. Is that right?
Yes. That I had forgotten about that detail, but you were so right. Yeah. Cause I had come out between when they had graduated and then, but yeah, that was funny because I totally caught them by surprise on that.
Yeah. That was fun.
Another one of my really favorite ones, I think, where we sort of like broke things down in a more like logical way was Lisa Diamond is sexual identity fluid. Lisa Diamond, what a character. I love her so much. But just aside from her being just a generally like fun and an extremely well-educated person, it was really cool to kind of understand the dynamics of how, attractions and feelings and what you like and what you don't like and taste and all the things. Like, it's not like you're a fixed in stone kind of a person. One of the things that she said that made a lot of sense to me was it's kind of like you're driving down the highway and you're in your lane. And like, sometimes as you drive down the highway, you change lanes, you kind of go left, you kind of go right, whatever, but you're ultimately traveling down the same highway going in the same direction. It's not like you're just like stopping and just like making a left turn and going a completely different direction. And in the same sense, we're kind of fluid people. So we all have the ability to like move and change and understand and whatnot. But like, ultimately we're not just like changing directions. Like, oh, I'm going to turn off the gay.
Yeah. And, one thing, Mike, I love that. And you're there for like the before and after as well. And we had Lisa, I think 4 times. Like we had her on.
It was several times.
Yeah. We've had her on a number of times. And one of the times, I don't know if you were still there, but she showed us a music video she had done with her friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was the second time she was on that she showed us that.
They like rented a convertible and had like done this whole music video. And she was so proud when she showed us on her laptop.
I had totally forgotten about that. That was so fun. Honestly, if you don't know Lisa Diamond, I highly recommend checking out her work. She's super cool, and she has done a lot of studies with LGBTQ people and women in the LGBTQ community in general. I think that's kind of her specialty, isn't it?
Yeah, and she's prolific and generous and wonderful and just so smart, and we've loved having her on every time.
Yeah, she's a wonderful person. Fun story, actually. I got to sit next to her at Charlie's wedding.
Oh.
And that was a fun experience because her and her wife had never been, I think, to an LDS wedding before. And it was an LDS gay wedding, which is very interesting. And so the two of them asked me about 1,000 questions, and I think I had answers for about 100 of the 10,000. Or maybe it was 4 questions that I had the answers to. But that was fun. Another one that was really good for me was How Do I Build Bridges with Michael Soto. And that was good for a couple reasons. Number one, because that was the first time I met Michael, and like I instantly was like, wow, I really like this guy. He is just so kind and so patient and just oozes that energy. Like I don't know how to describe it besides you sit in the room with him and you just feel like you can say anything and it will be greeted with understanding and love.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, in the behind the scenes for that one, are that we were in Arizona, and you had said, like, wouldn't it be fun if we like did the next live event in another state? And so, and all the work fell on you, of course. And so we packed all the stuff up in your car, and then we drove to Arizona, and then we set up the studio in Liz McDonald's house, and that's where we met Michael and where we recorded. And you were just working away all day.
It was frantic. Just like a little side story on that one too. That road trip, I love cars. I'm an EV enthusiast in particular. Not to say I only like EVs, but I really like them. And that was my first EV at that point. That was the longest EV road trip I'd ever done. And it was a doozy. I didn't know what I was in for. Technology has progressed a long way. I understand how to do things a little bit more now. And it was a long drive, and all of us just packed into that little Mustang Mach-E. But there we went. But yeah, no, it was really cool. And like the other reason I really loved that episode too was just the fact that that it was about building bridges. And I feel like that has been like such a pillar for me personally that I've taken just from the podcast in general. Just like, there's so much just anger and angst and all of that kind of stuff that really gets perpetuated on social media. And not to say that that isn't justified sometimes. Like there is a reason that people are upset sometimes, but building bridges and kindness just gets you so much farther than anger does. And so the topic was just like right up my alley. Michael was great. It was a new adventure in Arizona. So it was all good, good times.
Love that.
And the last one I wrote down, this one's very personal to you, Ben. This is a recent one.
Oh, goodness.
This was when we had sort of like the debrief after general conference. And like there were a lot of like deep-seated emotions that came out, and it took you and Charlie a couple of episodes to unpack that. And I think this kind of goes back to, what I was saying about the best episodes being the off the cuff or the unplanned ones, because that is not at all where that episode was supposed to go, right?
No.
Do you even remember what the topic was supposed to be? I don't remember.
I think we were just going to like talk about general conference, just like, and then I was unusually mad. And then Charlie was unusually defensive and invalidating. And then I got more mad.
It was just so interesting to watch, because like it started out as like, I'm not going to say it started as like an argument, but it kind of had that like that tension to it. But it was so cool, one, to see you walk through that and kind of understand what the source of the tension was. And like, of course it ended up being nothing to do with either of you specifically. It was just more underlying feelings that were independent, but like be able to deconstruct that and understand how to heal and move on, because like that's something that's been talked about so many times on the podcast, but you can only talk about things so much before it becomes like real practical application. So I don't know. It was cool. That was a cool one to watch.
Yeah. I'm curious what that was like for you being in the room, because when we recorded the intro for it after, we're like, we had a fight. Like we had this big fight. And then when I listened to it, I was like, it didn't seem that fighty like when I listened to it.
No.
But in the moment, it felt really tense.
Yeah, it's hard to describe, because you're right. Like I wouldn't describe it as like a fight either, but there certainly was a tension there. And it was really interesting because like on the backside of that, there were so many times, and this happened on a few episodes, but this was one in particular. There were so many times that I felt like I had something to add to the conversation, but I was like, no, I just want to let this play out. And like, it's not like I was on mic anyway, so I couldn't have said anything, but like, it was really cool to just like sit back and like feel the tension and watch you work through it,
Yeah. I remember when we recorded that episode, Charlie and I just like started talking, like clearly we were done recording, and Charlie was like, are you still recording, Mike? And you said, no, I stopped. And then he said, just keep recording. And then you started recording, and then our reconciliation was also recorded. But it was a long conversation. And
it was. But honestly, I feel like that was one of those like such necessary things. Because like the number of people that responded to that episode in such a positive way too.
Yeah.
And, you know, honestly, Ben, I have to give it to you for being that vulnerable, because that was a lot of vulnerability to like dig down into that and be willing to go there. So I don't know. I appreciated that at least. And I'm sure probably the rest of the audience did too.
Thank you. I've learned that vulnerability is the best way to live. So
It really is.
yeah. But I remember with that episode in particular, like Charlie and I were like trying to talk through things like, are you feeling better? And I was like, no. Like I just kept being upset. And then once it like clicked what the problem was, I instantly felt better. And like I noticed, I felt this relief. I was like, oh, this is what's going on.
It was kind of cool to watch, almost like you pulled the thorn out. Like you knew, like, oh, there's the thing and you got it.
Yeah. And it wasn't about general conference at all. It was about just like my fears of being accepted.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I feel like that's such like a good symbol, because like so often, you know, especially when it comes to people coming out, fighting to be accepted, making space in their communities, all of these things, like if there's ever feelings of like anger or hurt or tension or however you want to describe it, almost every time it just comes down to something simple like that, like just fear of being accepted, fear of being left alone, like, you know, just those things. And they're such universal human needs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why the podcast has resonated with people, because we're talking about things that are relevant to them, that they resonate with. Yeah. I'm curious about this, Mike. So, you know, being the face of the podcast, I will regularly get stopped and someone will tell me like, thank you for the podcast. It has changed my life. You know, it's blessed me in this way or this way. It's really nice because I get like active feedback on how the podcast is helping people. People don't know who you are. So,
no. Yeah. I've been recognized maybe 4 times. So it's like, I mean, it has happened, but very rarely. So I do experience the podcast in a very different way because of that. And it's kind of cool though, because like there's so many times when I like almost feel a little bit detached from like knowing like who's receiving it, how they're receiving it, and all that stuff. And so it's always cool to like get the feedback from you, because you do hear that like face to face.
Yeah. And so I know sometimes I'll like send you a text like, hey, I heard this, or this person said this, just so like, because you do a lot of work, you know, and I want you to know that like it really matters.
Yeah. I appreciate it. And, you know, it's one of those things too, where, you know, a lot of people have asked why I've stuck around as long as I have. And honestly, I feel like it's one of those things where I'm helping out in the way that I can. Like, this is my talent. Like, I'm a tech nerd. Like, I do this sort of thing professionally. So like, I understand how this works. It's easy and natural for me. And so why wouldn't I use that skill set to help those around me? You know, cause I remember early on, you know, after I came home from my mission, I was finally like having that realization of like, oh, I actually do have feelings for men. I remember praying and just feeling the distinct impression, like, you need to help other people like you. And I was like, no.
Like, but I need the help right now.
Yeah, exactly. And this has kind of been the manifestation of that for me. You know, this is my way of contributing and helping.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, Mike, is what this podcast has meant to you is you're able to help in the way that resonates with your skills and talents.
Yes. Yep. You know, because we all have a place that we can help people, and, you know, whether it's a technical skill, whether it's people skills, you know, whether it's just within your own personal friend group, like there is something for every one of us.
Yeah, that's awesome, Mike. I love that. Having talked to a lot of guests who have come on the podcast, and they all get to meet you and chat with you. Sometimes they're long chats, sometimes they're short chats. As people always say how nice you are, and how kind you are. And I feel like kindness is like kind of your way of being. Like, it's your MO.
I appreciate that. I try. I don't always succeed, but I try.
Yeah. What does it mean to you to like be a kind person in today's world?
A lot. You know, just kind of one of the things that is just so often on the front of mind is, you know, like I was saying before, is just how much anger and spiciness, you know, I say that all the time. Ooh, you're being spicy today. You know, like how much of that stuff is just like on the forefront of what we see every day on TikTok, on Instagram, on the news, just like even talking to people, like that's so much of what we hear. And it's incredible, like how much farther you get with people. when you're nice to them, because people just want to be treated decently.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's why it's so important to me, because I've seen the difference that makes, and sometimes it can be a little bit selfish too. Like, customer service, if you call and you're really nice to customer service, usually they're more likely to give you what you want. So sometimes, sure, there is a self-serving element to it, but I mean, like, no one's ever mad that they've been treated nicely. I want to be treated nicely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you do that. You treat people so nicely.
Well, I try.
I'm curious about this. So we've interacted a ton. Like, I've known you for like 5 years now. Like, there have been like tense moments with the podcast, and really hard things. Like, I remember the episode we recorded about Elder Holland's devotional. Like, it happened that day.
Yeah.
You came over to my house, Charlie came over to my house that day, and then we recorded it, and it was like, and you like edited it like while we were there. And like, Charlie and I had both been upset, and I just don't see you as someone who gets upset.
So I'll put it like this. I don't get upset often, but when I do get upset, it's usually over something really dumb.
Classic.
Yes.
Yeah. But how do you manage to do that? How do you manage, like, not to take things personally?
I wish I knew the secret myself, because sometimes I need to remind myself of it. I think really what it comes down to is just looking at the bigger picture. And I fully realize that this is one of those things that is so much easier said than done. It takes a lot of practice, and quite frankly, I don't always succeed at it either. But I feel like when you kind of take a step back and you realize, like, where is this, like, if someone's treating you poorly, like, where is this coming from? Probably like one of their just innate little, like, I'm afraid of not being seen. Like, those little things that kind of like that person is feeling at the root of that. Or when it comes to like the bigger scope things, kind of like in the case of Elder Holland's talk.
And that was the BYU talk in 2021.
Yes.
So, in case people don't know what I'm referring to.
It's one of those things where you just have to rely on the fact that, like, Heavenly Father's in control. Like, God knows what's happening, and, like, obviously we're not going to just be like automatically disadvantaged because of who we are as people, whether that's any one of the LGBTQ community, whether that's, someone with this color hair or this color skin, or like whatever trait makes you. Like, there's a place for all of us, and just like remembering that and like saying, like, hey, like, sure, this is an ouch. This doesn't feel very good. But at the same time, like, I have faith that things are going to work out. Like, I have that hope. Sometimes it's a little bit of a blind hope, but I don't know. That's kind of what gets me through. And, not to say that I don't get frustrated, because I certainly do.
Yeah. But I mean, I've known you for like 5 years, and you come off always as like an optimistic, hopeful person.
Generally, I am optimistic. That doesn't always work out for me, but that is my MO.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I just have one last story I want to share, and then some nice words to say about you.
Thank you.
Speaking of this episode where we talked about Elder Holland's August 2021 devotional, a lot, we record the podcast and then we'll keep talking after. And because that had been like such a public thing, and so many people had felt upset and hurt, people were reaching out to me and talking to me. And one of my friends came over after we recorded, and this didn't make it in the episode, but I remember her talking about how, talking about Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane, and how Jesus was being attacked, and to protect the Savior, he hurt someone and cut off his ear, and Jesus then healed the wound. And she said, sometimes apostles doing their very best end up causing pain, but it's Jesus who heals the wound. And I just remember that I thought, like, I wish I'd been on the podcast, but it wasn't. It was in this like after moment, and it's just been so fun to have you in those after moments where you're putting away the computer, and we're just still talking, and really beautiful moments happen. Yeah,
it is interesting because, like, so many times we stop recording, but then the conversation continues. Sometimes we stop recording and the conversation completely shifts to something else entirely. That's also very fun. But yeah, there are some of those moments, and it's fun to be a part of that. I'm like I said at the beginning, I'm really grateful to have been a part of this. It's been a blessing for me.
Yeah, us too, Mike. And I've told you this many times, but like I'm so grateful for all the things you do and how much help you give the podcast. But also, I'm just so glad we're friends.
Me too.
You know,
honestly, like so many great relationships, our friendship being one of them, has come from this. I honestly have so many more people in my network that I'm so grateful for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Mike, we love you. We appreciate you, and glad we get to see the person who's been doing a lot of the behind the scenes work, who we couldn't do this without.
Well, I'm glad to be on here. And before we finish, I would be remiss if I didn't give a mention to Dan, who's been helping edit since we've, kind of expanded to doing episodes in Arizona. Dan has been very helpful for taking some of the load off of me. So at this point, I'm not the only editor, and I want to thank him for his work too. But
I love that you are kind and gracious and helpful, Mike. And we're so grateful for you and Dan.
Well, thanks, man.
Thanks.